What's up, everybody? It's Reggie Williams, founder and CEO of Ambrosia for Heads. And with me, I have Jake Payne, our editor in chief. And together, this is our What's the Headline podcast. What's happening, man?
Man, glad to be here. Been looking forward to this all day. Usually we often tape in the earlier part of the day, but this is a nighttime taping, man, and we've got a lot to discuss.
Yeah, and it's we haven't done this for a minute, man. We've been doing interviews, which have been fantastic. We recently did Derringer and Mayhem Lauren, rapper Big Pooh, Cormega, and who am I leaving out? We did somebody else who was super dope. Anybody else? We have
No, those are
fourth,
the.
right?
But it's
That was
funny
it.
because it was Derringer and Mayhem, so maybe it felt like two people. But yeah,
Yeah,
three great interviews. Equally with that, I think three great albums. And one of the things, I don't know if this happens to our listeners and viewers, but I might like or really like a project, but then when you have the kind of those annotated liner notes where somebody really goes into it, it makes you listen more and appreciate more. And those three projects, which I, immediately from rip, from the first time I heard them, I really liked. They continue to just dominate my daily listening.
yeah, for sure, man. All great stuff, great conversations. We've been posting these more on our socials lately. Just
Mm-hmm.
clips. But we had one we did with rapper Big Pooh where he was talking about the things he's had to do to support his rap career, mainly driving Uber, and just how honest he was. And that one just resonated with a lot of people. It's interesting to see the comments for that too.
Yeah, I've looked a few times, and that's great to see. I woke up and I saw that on just like artists that I follow resharing that, and it's just super, super real because there's a lot of artists that you and I and all of our supporters look up to, and whether they talk about it in lyrics or not, they're doing other things, just like you and I do other things besides, what our resume says. And yeah, it's a nice awakening, and shout out to Pooh because he's one of the first artists to really own that. And I've not seen a single person say anything negative about it. It's just kind of a real raw and positive moment.
Yeah, a lot of thank yous. I saw Jerobi in there from a Tribe Called Quest talking about how he supported himself through, cooking, being a chef, like the food industry, and how Pooh is actually looking to get into that. So it's just wild to see the dialogue, man. It was really
Yeah,
cool.
Chip Fu from Fushnikins, Torre was in there. My guy from Philadelphia, Reef the Lost Cause, shared it. I love that, and there's a host of others. So yeah, man,
Right.
shout out to Pooh, and if you haven't heard the album or seen the interview, please do both.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, we got to start on a bit of a heavy note. We lost another great in hip hop, and it's crazy, man, for a genre that is not even yet 50 years old, and where most of the participants, I'd say, even from back in the day, are like mid to late 60s at most. We've lost so many people. And Coolio is someone who passed away about a week and a half ago. You wrote the story. You want to talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, Coolio was 59 years old. Was at a friend's residence, stepped to use the restroom, and his manager, longtime manager, found him in there unresponsive. And September 28th, later that day, Coolio was pronounced dead. And like you said, I mean, every year there's a clip of deaths, and this one is especially sad. I mean, I will say that Coolio has not been somebody that I think has been in the musical headlines a lot in the last 10 years. I've seen him covered on TMZ for some legal stuff, for some reality TV stuff, but I think that Coolio's impact is deep in rap. And also, similar, um you had come up with a headline in 2021 that Bismarcky was more than just a friend to hip hop. And I thought that that line was so powerful because, sometimes artists are reduced to their hit, especially in the crossover world. And I actually just saw recently that that line is on actually on Biz's tombstone,
Hmm.
which is really heavy. And Coolio made international fame. My parents, my uncles, elders know who Coolio is through Gangsta's Paradise. But we had covered him on the site in several intersections of culture. But I think anyone would admit that his catalog was much deeper, as was his talent.
Yeah, man. he, like Tone Loc and Young MC and a couple other artists we've talked about in the past, at the time did not get the kind of respect that he deserved. Tommy Boy artist. If you listen to the album cuts, like he rapped and like was a great talent, but people heard the hit, and at the time, ironically, it was you were considered being a sellout if you were too commercially successful. And that song was such a huge hit, Gangsta's Paradise, that I think it overshadowed a lot of his music. In fact, like I was not a huge Coolio fan until Fantastic Voyage dropped. And for me, I'm a huge fan of Slave and the original.
Well, that was
And
Lakeside, right?
Fantastic Voyage. Yeah, Lakeside. Yeah, you're right, Lakeside. Huge fan of Lakeside, and just really that song has always been something that like was powerful for me, and I had a renewed appreciation for it. I make these mixes for barbecues and stuff like that, and I did one maybe like 2013, 2014, and I put that on there, and it just hit so hard, man. The
Yeah.
bass line and everything. So I really started to appreciate him much later in life, but a real loss, and I was shocked. It always happens. It seems like when you're traveling or doing something out of the norm, you wake up and have this terrible news. But yeah, man. So rest in peace to Coolio, to his family, to his fans and friends. Tough news.
Hey, one other thing I just want to add that's interesting about Coolio that I think gets lost in the mainstream coverage is, we talk about, the hype man in hip hop, and sure, there's Flavor Flav and there's Spliff Star and Freaky Ta, and you can go on and on. And Coolio was down with Dub C and the Mad Circle. So when I was 12 years old, 13 years old, and cruising the bargain bins at the record store, I had Ain't a Damn Thing Changed, which oddly enough is a hard to find CD and album now, which is Dub C and the Mad Circle's first album as a group. Dub had done stuff, with DJ Aladdin for Low Profile. And Coolio is the hype man in that iteration of Mad Circle, with Crazy Tunes and Dub C. And not a heavy presence on the album, but kind of has his moments similar to, those other examples I just gave. And within 3 years of that, lands at Tommy Boy and comes with Fantastic, Voyage, which was before Gangster's Paradise. And I remember being, 10, 11 years old, loving that song. And Coolio, from that to It's All the Way Live to, he had this ability, not unlike other artists in hip hop, of popularizing, taking funk records from the late 70s and early 80s and bridging them for a new generation. And I remember as a kid, when Snoop shouted him out on, what is it, Doggy Dog World, my brother Coolio put me up,
Yeah.
I think that Coolio suffered a lot because he was in his own pocket. He was never down with Death Row. Actually, one of the stories since he passed is how Coolio was erased from a Tupac other appearance. They never got a chance to work together. So Coolio was kind of on an island with Raz Kaz and a few other, Dub and a few other people. But out of that, he still finds gold and platinum and Grammy success. And, there's a 3-album run at Tommy Boy from Fantastic Voyage to the third album. I think it's My Soul, the one with I'll See You When You Get There on it, which, early melodic song, just a super talented dude. And yeah, I often wonder how he would have been looked at differently had he not had so much mainstream success so fast. But absolutely, to echo your point, rest in peace, and another sad bit of news.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point. You say that he tapped into those funk records too, because obviously that is so endemic to the West Coast sound. You had Quick doing it, you had 8 doing it, obviously Dre with Snoop and that whole Death Row camp. But would you say that that Coolio was? Do you think of him as like an LA artist when like those other artists I named, or do you think that the hits he had kind of transcended it and makes people not think of him in that way?
I think of him as an LA artist from the introduction. First time I remember seeing Coolio was Fantastic Voyage, which, if you recall, cool concept for 94, the trunk of like a 65 or 66 Chevy pops, and everyone's coming out to go to a beach party. But it was the lowrider. It was the braids. Like Coolio was positioned against, Snoop and some of those other artists, Eazy-E and BG Knockout and Dre Stud, like that whole era of mid 90s. So and it was wild. I'm originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I was traveling when the news broke of his passing, and I'm watching like a mainstream local news report, and they're saying that Coolio was born within greater Pittsburgh, a fact I never knew, which is wild. Like that I wouldn't know that, and that again, like Coolio was this guy who bounced around like a lot of other folks in hip hop, but I do think of him as an LA artist for sure. What about you?
Yeah, obviously he's LA and the sound is LA, but I don't like you said he was on an island or not down with a clique in that way, besides WC the Mad Circle initially. And I don't think of him when I think of West Coast LA artists. Like he isn't one that comes to mind readily. If
Yeah.
I'm making an LA playlist or something like that, it's much more those guys that I mentioned, and some of the newer guys, Problem, TDE, even Underground, Far Side,
Freestyle
that, yeah,
Fellowship. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So it's interesting, but LA was in the news this week because the game was on a podcast. There's a new podcast on Uproxx, and it is. Do you remember what it's called?
No, it's co-hosted by Just Blaze. Let me tell you the name of it right
Yeah,
now.
is it Fresh? It's something to do with sneakers. But in any case, he was on the show with Just
Fresh
Blaze,
Pair.
Fresh Pair, yeah. And so Just Blaze asked him, top 5 LA rap albums, and Game was like, he exhaled for a second. You could tell that the question hit him, but he didn't hesitate and he went right to it, and he gave 5, I think, really great responses. Very hard to argue against any of them. And for a dude who self-proclaimed his album Drillmatic to be the best album of the year, and how it was going to put him, in the top, 5 of like lyricists and things like that. He showed a lot of humility in not naming just like his own catalog, but he named the Chronic. Because in his mind, Dre, really kind of helped to kick off that movement in a major way. And then he talked about Doggy Style, and he said that really he saw the Chronic as partly Snoop's debut too. He put the documentary in there next, which was, and he said his justification for that was that LA rap had kind of fallen off the map, and he was the guy who brought it back and put it back, in its kind of like glory days, and was the dude who held that down for about 10 years, he said, until obviously Kendrick came along. He named Kendrick Good Kids Mad City at number 4, and these weren't ranked, but this is the order that he did. And number 5, when I thought he was gonna have skipped some of the other OGs, he went back and named Ice Cube's Death Certificate. So first of all, I want to talk about that list, the games list, and then I want to go back and figure out whether we think that was the right list, or what what yours is and what mine is, because the story that I wrote, I really said that in the headline that it's hard to dispute any of these, and I think it's like at a certain point, if you name, it's like top 5, right? There's probably 20 artists you can make a credible argument for being in the top 5. I think, and for the reasons the game articulated, it's really hard to pull any of those records out. But what do you think about that top 5 in general?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I liked the question. Shout out to Just Blaze. You and I recently did 2 pieces this summer, one on our readers determining the 20 greatest hip hop albums of all time through voting, which great discourse there. And you and I, on just looking at our own opinions, weren't very far off from our readers. And then we did another one of every MC who's ever shouted out their top 5 MCs when asked, or done it even just, without a prompt. And I really enjoyed that. And so this way of framing the question is interesting because it just makes it a little bit more fresh. And I'll say for me, it got me thinking. I'd never really put it in the LA box. I think, maybe somebody's asked me West Coast, but not LA. So that's number 1. And number 2, I mean, Game has over the years, I've interviewed Game a bunch, and I've always found him to be a really likable dude, and he's certainly a hip hop head. But as you kind of alluded to, he's not above hyperbole. I wouldn't say that Drillmatic is the greatest album this year. Also, Game has done some things that are a bit of a head scratcher, and I'll use this latest, diss at Eminem as a great example of that, and we have, a piece covering it on the site. All of that said, I thought his list was really hard to argue with. I thought it was really true to a few different eras. It wasn't just partial to his homies. It was really good. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I liked his list. I liked the justification for it. I think that if any were to be pulled, it would probably be his album. And also, it's really hard, as you know. I think Kendrick has, arguably 4 classic albums,
Yeah.
and Mr. Morale is a great album too, and the Big Steppers. It's hard to say whether Good Kid is better than a To Pimp a Butterfly, which was like nominated 11 times or something like that, an insane amount. And Damn, which won a Pulitzer, the only non-jazz, non-classical album to do so. It's hard to say which one of those, or maybe more than one, should have been in the list. 2001, a lot of people say is as good as The Chronic. It wasn't as groundbreaking sonically, but it was pristinely mixed, and the rapping on it was, I think, equally, if not better, than that on The Chronic. So there's a lot of arguments there. For me, I think the one that I would swap out would be the documentary, and I would put Straight Outta Compton in there, because that is the thing that launched the careers of Dre and Cube and these guys. It put Compton on the map. No one was talking about Compton and hip hop. No one knew about it, and all of a sudden, it was a powerhouse. It was, arguably the second most famous city in rap, to New York, and the various boroughs. So I think I would put that in there. I think there's an argument for albums, that really established the underground, like the Far Side's Bizarre Ride to the Far Side. But even there, like their second album, I think, was just as good. And you had Dilla, really kind of starting to establish himself on that album. So I think there are arguments for other albums being on there, but it's hard for me to say that like any of them were categorically wrong.
One of the things that I really liked about it is for Game was more than just a list, and he qualified a couple of things. And one being, in looking at Kendrick's catalog, he said that Good Kid, Mad City felt more like the LA album, which I take, compared to Damn, which was groundbreaking, piece of art. And I thought that I would agree with that. And, as I've said before in this podcast, like I'm always partial to Section 80. But I have to tell you that the first time I listened to Section 80, if not for some lyrical cues, I would not have necessarily had a specific place in mind for that album. I remember hearing GLC on it, and I believe BJ the Chicago Kid, and I'm like, oh, okay, is this Chicago? I wasn't as versed in Kendrick in 2011 as you were to know all of that. And that's not to say that every album has to be straight G-Funk, but that album, I would definitely say that Good Kid, Mad City is Kendrick's most LA album. And in that 4-album classic run that I agree with you on, that is the one that rings City of Angels to me. With that, in the same line, Cube says America's Most Wanted, or Game says America's Most Wanted by Ice Cube. And as a hip hop fan, he points out that a lot of that album, was made with the Bomb Squad, the Public Enemy production outfit. It was recorded, in Long Island and Green Street Studios in Soho. That album is really interesting. And that got me thinking too of, how do we perceive geographical changes, in hip hop? Like I look at Bone Thugs and Harmony, right? Like they are so Midwest, but there are albums that they made early in their career that sound super West Coast because they were coming to Ruthless. They were living in LA. They were working with Easy. They were working with, some of the Ruthless team. There's other artists, like I think of like a Too Short that, cut his teeth in the Bay, but spent all those years in the mid 90s on in Atlanta. So you're going to have some of the diaspora of an Atlanta sound on there. I mean, there's a million cases. To your point, I think you make a really good one in swapping Straight Outta Compton with the documentary. And I agree that of the five, the documentary is not the one for me. I don't know if I've ever said it on this podcast, but I've said it in my, just hip hop discussions with friends. I prefer the documentary as an album to 50 Cent's Get Rich or Die Trying. Like in the G Unit catalog, that is the album I love. I think it's masterfully produced, and it's interesting that Just Blaze is where Game said this, because I think Just Blaze provided, apart from what he's done with Jay, some of his best work on that album. As did Timberland, as did, a host of people. But apart from the lyrics, that album taps into a lot of what was going on other places. I think The Game has more LA albums than that. LAX comes to mind, which dropped, I think, almost 4 years later.
Documentary 2.0 and 2.5 both were LA albums. Yeah.
Maybe even more so than LAX. Great point.
Yeah.
The Game is really good at that. And he, got comfortable in his skin, especially after he had built such a strong fan base and all of that. For me, I think, I cannot refute Straight Outta Compton. I'm going to make a controversial pick, though, and say All Eyes on Me. And that's controversial just because, okay, boom, Tupac, New York born, had all these ties to Jersey, spends his time 1 year in Baltimore, Marin City in Northern California, is kind of introduced as a Bay Area artist. And I would even say, that Tupac's best album, Me Against the World, is not an LA album. That album, has Richie Rich on it and kind of honors parts of Tupac's past. It had Old School on it. He's working with Easy Mo B. It's more of a general hip hop album or a New York City album to me. And I was just reading earlier tonight, he allegedly recorded that in like 10 different studios, was just kind of taking it on the run as his life was. But when he gets out of prison and joins Death Row, you look at what is his statement, California Love, like shouting out the different parts of LA. He's working with Dre, he's working with Snoop and the Dog Pound and all of these different people. And you came up with a headline 6 years ago, almost 7, that All Eyes on Me is the last flawed classic album. Was it last or only?
Yeah, I think the only.
And it's majorly flawed. It's double disc, could have been reduced to one and been, much more killer, less filler. But I love that album, and to me, that's what I put there.
Which one are you taking out for the
documentary?
No, okay, but like let's go into the 5 though, right? Like if I'm putting Straight Outta Compton in there, and I'm keeping Death Certificate, Good Kid, The Chronic, and Doggy Style, which one of those are you taking out for All Eyes on Me?
Probably Death Certificate. I don't love that answer. It's not my favorite. Similar to Pac, that's not my favorite Cube album. I go to America's Most. Death Certificate is right there though, and that's a phenomenal album. The rapping is just so on point, but the sound to me is super duper LA. And that one, I'll level with you. Just even in writing this out, I spent over an hour just kind of taking notes, and there's albums that are really close for me. You mentioned it to me last week when Game made the comment. Blue and Exiles Below the Heavens, deserves to be in the conversation. I would say Cypress Hill's Black Sunday deserves to be in the conversation. Compton's Most Wanted, Music to Drive By. I mean, there are so many, even more contemporarily, YG's My Crazy Life is a super LA album to me. You can go look in all the different eras. I'm looking and I'm like, how is there not DJ Quick on this list? And, I was re-listening to, his whole catalog. You can go on and on and on. I don't like doing that to Cube, but I think I'm comforted by the caveat that Cube is a dominant lyrical force of Straight Outta Compton.
Well, he's part of NWA too, so you kind of check that box with him. But you could say the same thing for Dre on that. For me, Ice Cube is one of my top 5 rappers, and Death Certificate, in my opinion, is his best album for sure. The Bomb Squad album, I was actually the one who made that point about it being more of a New York album, and that for me was not. It didn't sound like Cube for me, Death Certificate is when he went back to his West Coast roots, and that sounded like an Ice Cube record to me. And he's talking about LA things. You know, he had the light side and the dark side. You know, he had like messages, he had humor. Bird in the Hand was incredible. Like that to me was Cube's best album. So it's really hard for me to take that one out, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. For me, like that list, you know, man, Doggy Style. Yeah, I can't take any, you know, I think in terms of Sonics, Straight Outta Compton might be the weakest one in that top five for me. I think that Straight Outta Compton um, gets placed where it does because of the message that it had, you know, with
Yeah.
F the Police and, you know, really showcasing some of the police violence against, you know, MCs is one of the first albums to really put that on front and center. So, but, you know, in terms of like the quality of the album, there are definitely a couple of like, you know, skip ones for me on that album. And so if I was going to pull one, it might be that. But you know, would it be All Eyes on Me? Man, I don't know, man. I think I'd have to go a little countercultural. I think I would go with Far Side because they launched, in my opinion, that whole LA underground movement. You know, if we're gonna talk, like I thought Game did a great job of putting context around things and giving the
Hmm.
historical importance of it. And I think Far Side did that. Freestyle Fellowship too, but I think Far Side did so better.
Yeah, I'm not mad at that. I will say that the Far Side's, you know, especially their second album, but their first, I've never caught up to what other people adore about it. I'll just say that. I can appreciate it. And I will add that Passing Me By, if I were to choose 10, maybe five all-time greatest hip hop songs, that is one. Like I love that group, but on an album level, I've always listened more than I've spoke to other people that have captured its significance. And I do agree, like there's more to LA than just gangster rap. And I know Kendrick is always on the periphery of that, but it would be nice to have that representation, be it through, you know, AC Alone and Micah 9 and Freestyle Fellowship or Far Side or a Blue in Exile. You need a representation of LA. And I also think that's one of the reasons why in looking at the list, I'm like, you know, what about a Cypress Hill? You know, we need there's many facets to what LA sounds like. And I do agree with you. I think of those sonically, Straight Outta Compton might be the weakest. I think NWA's second album is much better produced than its first.
The
But I
third one,
think,
the third one.
well, yeah, if we're not counting the
Not including
compilation.
the EP, no, the EP.
Oh, the 100 Miles Run EP.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, I
You mean
mean,
it fell for zagging, right? That one.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, that to me is one of Dre's finest hours. Not on par with the Chronic, but
yeah.
it's right there. Yeah, and it's interesting too. I mean, neither you nor I are saying 2001, and I mean, I know we both respect the hell out of that album, but not it, huh?
Nah, man. I do think there's an argument that it's as good as the Chronic. Like I've made that argument many times, but the Chronic was seminal. You know, I think again when it comes to two albums, the one that gets denied is the one that kind of broke ground and like you know broke the mold.
Yeah.
That's what I think the Chronic was. Before we move on too far, I want to go back to a couple things you said. So first of all, you talked about liking the documentary more than Get Rich or Die Trying. I did too, but I will say that the documentary to me sounds very much like a 50 album. You know, to
Hmm.
me, it was like Get Rich or Die Trying West Coast version, you know, and 50's imprint is so heavy on there. I want to talk about how 50 Cent killed Ja Rule and clowned him for being sing-songy and making pop records by being sing-songy and making pop records.
Yeah.
Like, why is that never called out? Because like when you listen to 50 Many Men, like 21 Questions,
PIMP.
how we do all of it is singing, right? Like
Yeah.
he's singing, and it's like you could hear kids bop versions of these songs, right? Like you know, you could hear kids singing these songs, and they're very nursery school rhyme type cadence, you know, very simplistic. How is it that 50 was able to kill Ja Rule for doing something that he was doing even more so than Ja Rule was?
You know, I always think that 50 benefited from the power of the mixtape and the album cut. I mean, Fifth could do that thing where it was undisputed that he was, a head down, hard nosed rapper, but then he would just keep accumulating audience through, I don't want to call them girl songs, but through those push records like that. And you're right, like it's almost, and I'm sure if you and I were to have 50 on this podcast, and I hope we do someday, he would conjure up something like, I wanted to just stick it to Ja Rule like even further of like, I'm gonna steal your formula and make you irrelevant. And I was just thinking, I mean, Ja's great, statement album. I think his last great kind of song in that conflict was New York with, Fat Joe and Jadakiss, which eventually puts Joe and Kiss and the rest of the Locks on the outs with 50 simply by association. And that was such a hard record. I mean, they used it in the on the album version of the Khaled Jadakiss joint. But even that, like the chorus had that, kind of melodic singing, in the growly Ja Rule way. But yeah, man, I mean, you make a really, really interesting point. And to the first point you made, that formula carries into Hate It or Love It, like, which is one of the, I would say in retrospect, the biggest song from a mainstream perspective of the documentary. I
Hate It or Love
remember
It and How We Do. They both had that
this
same
is how,
formula.
yeah,
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 they both
yeah.
had the same formula.
Game benefited so much though. I mean, as did 50. And it's one of those things like in our list, there are at least 3 albums that relate to Dre. On my list, there are 3 albums that are Death Row. We just mentioned that with Coolio of like how you brand an artist. And I think with the West Coast, music videos have always been so important of just showing a culture, even if it's exploitative, that looks interesting, of lowriders and hats and carjackers and bikini clad women at pool parties and barbecues, like just visually, like the LA rap and LA in particular, because I don't think it's quite like that for the Bay, just looked so interesting and it benefited so much from that video era. And I know that by 2004, MTV and BET weren't playing videos like they once were, but the game was kind of part of that last breath of, what's this artist look like? What is he doing? All of this. And yeah, it's interesting. And it's funny that you and I agree on that being better than Get Rich or Die Trying.
Yeah. So the other thing I want to talk about, you mentioned Dre. One of the things that Game said on this podcast, another thing he said was that Dre did not produce a single song on the documentary. He said he's never ever had a Dr. Dre production, and mind you, that's like 7 or 8 songs on the album say they're co-produced by Dre.
Yeah.
But we've all heard rumors and things like that about like Dre not being as participatory in the songs where he gets some of the credits. And you couple that with Game's statement a few months ago that Kanye West did more for him in 3 weeks than Dre did in like 3 years or whatever it was. You start to wonder, like, do you think that's true? Do you think that or is that more Game's hyperbole that Dre has never produced a record for him?
Listen, I've been in rooms with the Game. I've been in rooms with the Game and Jimmy Henchman in my life. I think that's cap. I think Game is in his feelings. And I feel like similar to what he's done with Eminem, he's trolling. I think the Game was really disappointed to not be part of the halftime show. I think it made him feel either as a liability or irrelevant. And this is purely speculation on my part. But right after that, we saw the Drink Champs where he made those remarks. And I think Game is really dismissing, because I can go through the documentary and listen and know what Dre was part of. It had that knock. Now, of course, since the days of LA Dre on that second NWA album and Colin Wolf, and we did a great article 6 or 7 years ago of some of the other people that have kind of stood in the shadows of Dre's success. Again, I'm from Pittsburgh. Sam Snead, Melman. Dre has always been a collaborator, but he has this ability to kind of take those elements and put that knock on it. And I think the documentary, what made that album so great is it was Dre coming back home, having an artist that was from the same city he was, and rapping with an appreciation for hip hop. And it was there. I think Dreams is a fine record, and I know Game has done other things with Kanye, but I thought that was one of the more hyperbolic things that he said in recent time, and I think he's definitely in his feelings. Do you agree with me?
Man, it's hard to say. Like, I hear you on having to knock, right? Like, there are certain Dre sounds that we have come to associate with him, and it's multiple eras. You know, to your point, straight out of Compton, he was much more like sample based, and it wasn't necessarily soul samples. It was all over the place from Express Yourself to, whatever it might have been. When he went into A Feel for Zag and he started to really get into that G funk sound, right? Always into something.
Real Brothers Don't Die.
Yeah, is
Yeah.
where you really started to hear it, right? And that sound continued through the Chronic and Doggy Style and and other places. He started to evolve to a different sound when he went to Aftermath and released the compilation album. Like Been There Done That was a very different sound. And then by the time 2001 came, he had like kind of staccato, like piano and like really hard hitting drums. The question for me though is, and so I think about How We Do as an example of that, which sounds to me very much like a Dre, that new era, late '90s era, or early
Like
2000s.
that Mary J. Blige, Gwen Stefani, that
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. That era Dre, right? But when I look at the album credits, it's Dr. Dre and Mike Elizondo, right? Like, so you wonder how much of those sounds evolutions are really him, or is it that he's paired with a different person now? Like,
Yeah.
how Q-Tip was with Dilla and his sound evolved. And
Great example.
you know, um, you start to wonder, is it, because I don't know. I do know that there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the music business where people get credit where they didn't actually do what they said they did. And it was an honor to be on a track with Dre. So I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you, and that is always going to be Dre's Achilles heel. Like when we talk about the greatest producers, Dre is phenomenal, and even if he's just mixing the record or he's adding some seasoning in to bring it home, his place is as I see it undisputed. But when you can start to compare him to a DJ Premier or a Pete Rock, like two guys who have never been accused of sharing the boards. I know like Marley, they say worked with K-Def later on, but I think early on, Marley was Marley. That starts to matter. But I think to Game's point though, like it's funny, like if that were coming from a Kendrick Lamar, it would make more sense to me because you look at Kendrick's career and there have been you can count them on one hand, I think, the times where he's rapped to Dre production, a few of those being on Dre albums. The Game always had it, and I remember being part of those campaigns. When they got back together, how much that meant to the Game at the time, like how much he did a whole album called The Doctor's Advocate with Dre not involved. So I think he's just struggling for that attention. And if he would have said Dre hasn't done enough for my career, as you might think, that's something to consider. But Kanye, I mean, tell me if you remember it differently. I don't remember Dreams being that definitive of a record. And I know Game appeared on College Dropout or Late Registration. Which
Late
one
registration.
Late Registration. I don't remember that being a focal point. Again, that's perspective. It's Game saying Game, but like, do you remember those records having that kind of impact?
Well, it's two different things, right? So I think it's possible that he's never rapped on a Dre beat. That being said, let's say that's true, right? Let's say that's completely true. Even if that's true, there is no way in the world that he can justify a statement that Kanye has done more for him in 3 weeks than Dre did in 3 years. Dre was responsible for launching his entire career. Period. You know what I mean? Like, period. Like, so, like it 2 point is capped. So, yeah.
Before that, I mean, he was on JT the Bigger Figures label, and they were putting out stuff, as I remember it, and people knew about it kind of sort of if you were reading Murder Dog magazine, but Dre was that fire in the stadium moment, and so was 50. But anyway.
So while we're talking about Dre, another story popped up in the last few days. which kind of set things on fire for me. I can't wait. So we'd had heard rumors that Snoop and Dre were in the studio. We saw pictures of them with Harry O in the studio. Harry O being one of the original investors in Death Row Records, who's now part of Snoop's new Death Row venture. And we heard that Dre and Snoop might be working on something. At the time, often we see these pictures, nothing comes about it. Maybe you get a song or something like that on a soundtrack or whatever. But now Snoop definitively came out and said that he and Dre have been working on an album. Harry O actually said that too in the summertime, but to hear from Snoop himself, it's very different. You broke both those stories. And that the album is coming in November, and it's called Missionary as a sequel to Doggy Style. But you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's two interesting points about that. Harry O tells Kevin Garnett's podcast, Kevin on it, in the summertime, and Snoop broke the news to Stephen A. Smith. Interesting kind of just commentary on music journalism, the way that sports figures are breaking this news. Yeah, I'm super excited by it. Snoop is positioning it, obviously, pun intended, and the album title as the 30th anniversary of Doggy Style. Doggy Style came out in 93. We are also in the midst in 2022 of the 30th anniversary of The Chronic, which I believe is in December. So it's interesting. Either one of two things are going to happen. They're going to find a way to kind of amalgamate those albums, or those anniversaries, I should say, or it's not going to be November. And, we've lived in an era where Kendrick Lamar and Drake and J. Cole, some of the top players in hip hop history and in the game can drop a surprise album. I don't know if Snoop, he certainly can do it, but I more lean that there's a rollout. So either it'll happen on a fly, it'll happen in 2023 against what he said, or one of these days, any day now, probably be when you and I are both catching flights, that a song drops. And no matter what scenario it is, I can't wait for it. Like, this is, to me, like one of those things that I've waited a long time for. And not for nothing, Dre was very much a part of No Limit Top Dog, very much a part of Blue Carpet Treatment, which I would say are Snoop's two of his best albums after Doggy Style. Dre and Snoop have a formula, and this is also part of a rewriting the narrative, changing chapters. This is bigger than just an album. This is Dre coming back to Death Row and Thought, which even in 2001 I don't think he did. So I'm super excited about this. Just massive stuff.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it too. Snoop has obviously continued to do his thing consistently for 30 full years. Like, he's never taken a break. I don't know that there's been a year that's gone by without some sort of new Snoop Dogg music. But to get a full project from him and Dre is just really dope. And after hearing what Dre did for the Grand Theft Auto, those 6 tracks, like, I mean, those to me stand amongst his best work.
Wow.
Especially like Diamond Mine and ETA with Anderson .Paak and Snoop and Busta, right? There's some really great music that came out of there. So if Doc is coming with heat like that, man, I think we're in for a real treat.
You asked a while ago, and we spoke about it a bit with Nas and King's Disease 1. What does legacy, what does a Grammy mean to an artist that's been in hip hop for 20 and 30 years? And Back on Death Row was a cool album title and a cool message that coincided with Snoop's acquisition earlier this year. We knew about the album title before we knew that Snoop was the owner. We thought he was just releasing catalog on the label. It wasn't an album that I would consider among his best. Something with Dre, something with them in the studio is game changing. And even in looking at the LA rap album question, I did a little bit of research. There's only 2 LA artists that have ever won the best rap album of the year Grammy, and they've both won it twice. Kendrick Lamar and Tyler, the Creator. The only other West Coast artist to win that award is Macklemore and Ryan Lewis, for The Heist, being from Seattle. So it's really interesting. You know, Snoop and Dre are two of these artists that have always been shunned by the Grammys. Can be a litany of reasons behind that. I think anyone who knows music can make those assumptions. But an album like this, in a time like this, could give Snoop the feather in his cap, and Dre, that has always eluded them on a musical level, be it from the Grammys or anywhere else. And I think that that's a really necessary milestone in both of those men's careers.
Yeah, I don't know that it's necessary. You know, I think that their legacies are cemented, and we all know the checkered history of the Grammys.
Sure.
You know, so I don't know that a Grammy validates them any. I think it would be cool for them to get it, just like it was real cool for Nas to get it too. But you know, I don't think that if they go without a Grammy in any way, I mean, these dudes, to your point earlier, literally just came off doing the Super Bowl halftime
Right.
show, arguably the greatest of all time. You know, one of the top three, probably. You know, Prince,
Yeah.
that one, and maybe Beyonce. But um, you know, so for and Dre is a billionaire. You know, he has headphones. Like Snoop has done everything, including like Martha Stewart TV show, like these guys, their legacies are, I think, beyond cemented. So Grammy would be cool, but you know, I don't think it would be lacking.
You're right, and let me reframe that a little bit. It could be Grammy, but it could also be like, okay, we watched Eminem now getting inducted in the Hall of Fame. I'll bet you, you know, a six pack right now that in 2023, like Snoop gets that look. Like, you know what I mean? Like we're starting to whatever the mainstream thing is, that's gonna happen of like reminding the greater community of what these artists meant, not just in the early 90s. And
Yeah.
in Dre's case, you know, there's a few check-ins there. But yeah, it'll be interesting, and I really hope that music delivers. Because
So
that's
you
huge.
said something. You said something earlier. You talked about like kind of fits and starts, and how you know we'll hear something about an album and then it won't come. So one of the things I've been thinking about is, you know, there were all those news reports, and they were back in September of 2020 about Kendrick Lamar being seen on a beach, you know, with an umbrella and like in a phone booth and stuff like that, filming a music video. Do you remember that when that came out?
No, you know what's funny? I actually don't remember that, but that doesn't mean anything because I often tune out those like rumor things. But go ahead.
Well, I'm a Kendrick stan, so you know, and there
Yeah.
are actually photos that surfaced. If you look carefully, you'll see that those were actually scenes being shot for the N95 video,
Oh wow.
which we know didn't drop until May of 2022. So now almost a full 2 years later. So that means that that song at least was complete. And you know they don't shoot music videos until the album is done or close to being done and really ready to be released. So what do we think happened to delay the album for 2 years?
Man, that's interesting. And I mean, it's purely speculation, but you know, it wasn't until we really started to lead up to the album. I don't think it was until this year, man, maybe last year that we knew that Kendrick would had one more album with TDE. Like
It
clearly there
was
was
August
somewhere in
of,
there
yeah,
that
2021. Yep.
with the Keem record,
Well,
was that when
August
we
of
learned?
2021, he mentioned he put out the statement that you know this would be his last one, and then Family Ties dropped a week later, and he's waving the PG Lang flag. Yeah,
That's right. And we did, and that's when we ranked, you know, TD's place among record labels.
yeah,
So yeah, I would have to believe it's that or it's perfectionism, but it's wild. I guess in the old days, you know, people would shoot a video, and I know it still happens now, but not necessarily for artists of Kendrick's ilk of like, yo, I made a really good song, it's catching traction, I'll do a video. And when I do the video, the album isn't ready. But Kendrick is an albums-based artist. So it's wild to imagine that he would make a video to a song that he knew he was going to keep for a bigger project. For me, it's either those two things. It's either the pursuit of perfection or it's, you know, there was other stuff. And it might have also been some of those themes he's addressing on the album. But, you know, you as you said, you're a stan, you follow Kendrick. I will wholeheartedly say at a deeper level than I do. What do you think?
yeah. I mean, to me, I think that there's probably some contractual stuff going on. You know, I think that they were probably figuring out how they were going to wind down their business and how he was going to you know, do his thing with PG Lang, and these things take time, you know. Yeah, I think that that's probably what it was.
Hmm.
I think that's probably what it was. Yeah.
So, you know, one of the bigger stories this week, and not just this week, but this year, has kind of been Kanye West place in the media. And I think that started again, just like Kendrick last year with the Drink Champs appearance, two-part episode. A lot was said there. Obviously he put out the album last year and that whole rollout, but especially in the last, I'll say 6 weeks, I keep reading Kanye's name in the unlikeliest of places, New York Times op-ed. People have spoken about it as it pertains to the stock market. I'm curious to ask you, because we've had through the site, and I think also through this podcast, a number of check-ins of, where Kanye is in relation to the greater musical and hip hop discussion. I'm curious to get kind of your take over those developments as of late.
Yeah, I mean, I've pushed us really hard to provide a balanced coverage for Kanye, because there's so much what I believe to be clickbait or solely focusing on the rants, the outbursts, the negativity, that a lot of the good things that he says, the things that are about Black empowerment and free thinking and other things that I believe are powerful messages, owning your own things, controlling your own destiny, things like that we pulled out of Drink Champs and stuff like that. I think it gets lost in the sauce. And I think it's important to highlight all of those things instead of drowning it out with just the negative. So I've really wanted us to be careful on that. I also think that the mental illness thing was used to discredit a lot of the stuff that he talked about and not give enough credit to the things that that I mentioned before. And I'm also careful about how Black people are positioned in media in general. And so that being said, the thing that troubles me most is just how incessant the coverage of Kanye is, right? He is in the news. I used to say that there's no one in the news more than Kanye except for Donald Trump.
Mhm.
He's in the news even more than like the Kardashian Jenners, and it's been pretty much nonstop since Taylor Swift. And I can't remember if that was 2008, 2007,
2009.
2009. Okay, 13 years, right? This guy has been in the news nonstop 13 years. He's talented, in a lot of different ways. He's talented in music and fashion, but there's no one in the world who mandates or merits that kind of coverage. Like it's a fetish, it's a fixation. I also think it's somewhat laziness, and I think that it is preying on human beings' desire to see train wrecks.
Mm.
I think human beings like to see disaster, they like to see people unravel, and I think that he is, like I said, the equivalent of Trump in terms of like, oh, it's always going to be easy, low hanging fruit that's going to grab people in and get them to read. But I really step back and question the motivation behind this beyond the obvious of like the commercial part, right? So let's say that he is truly mentally ill. Then in that case, then people are preying on a mentally ill person and really being opportunistic about like what he's doing in order to like exploit that. That's let's say he is mentally ill, then that's what's happening. Let's go to the other side though and say that he's not mentally ill and people are just covering it then he's being super manipulative of the media and doing everything he can, literally like almost setting himself on fire in order to get attention, saying whatever comes to mind, whatever he knows is going to be super controversial. We've heard it all, the slavery is a choice stuff, now the White Lives Matter stuff, like, and like the recent comments I won't even get into because
Yeah.
he's already been banned for saying these things from Instagram. In that case, then people are purposefully covering someone who is manipulating the media and trying to like command attention at any cost. No matter what the reason for it, like I don't believe that one, the media should be covering it that way, and two, I wonder why people care so much. What do you think it is that motivates people to care so much what Kanye West does, because Kanye's life, Kendrick has that line on Savior that, you know, about LeBron and himself and Future, like not being your savior. They brought you great music. They brought you great, games. Future taught you how to like save your commas, but he is not your savior.
Right.
Kanye West gave you Yeezys, but he is not your savior. Like, what is it about Kanye that people are so fixated by?
Yeah, man, I never owned a pair of Yeezys. I uh I think it's Beatlemania. I think that, Kanye is not just for music, but for fashion, for politics, for social commentary, for all of these things at different points in his life. He is the light, the brightest light burning at a fame level. I'm not saying, that's not me, that's not a metaphor for genius, especially as of late. And I think people follow it. And I look at, again, to the Pittsburgh connection, I look at Andy Warhol and his concept of fame, of how you retain people's attention and what you can do, and how people can become celebrities despite limited contribution. Like you can be a celebrity simply based on how you carry yourself. So I think Kanye ties into that. And then there's also this element. You came up with a headline years ago, and I dug in. I wasn't feeling it, but you likened Kanye West to Andy Kaufman. And if people, know a simple Wikipedia read of Andy, late in his life as a highly accomplished comedian, he'd done these incredible concepts on SNL, done some really avant-garde theater stuff where he would literally just pull everyone out of the theater and take them out for cookies and ice cream and milk. Like, Andy Kaufman was all of these things, but late in his life, he became fixated on studio wrestling and began becoming kind of an anti-hero, becoming somebody who, made light of wrestlers and women, and he was doing all of these things. And we'll still never know if that was truly mental illness, Andy Kaufman pursuing a passion, or his, I won't say his greatest act, but part of the art.
Oh
And I
no,
think
we know it was an act. Like there was a documentary that like detailed it all. It was all definitely an act. He and Jerry Lawler, like, so I grew up watching this. It was in the Mid-South wrestling circuit, which was like, from like Southern Indiana down to like Memphis, mostly out of Memphis. Jerry the King Lawler, Andy was wrestling women, like you said, and like, really being super insulting to Lawler and people who had Southern accents and talking down on people who didn't have money and stuff like that. But behind the scenes, it was all a gag. They were in on it. Like
Mhm.
everyone knew. Like, there's a scene where he and Lawler, like, in the movie, what is it, Man on the
Man
Moon?
on the Moon. Yeah.
Yeah, you see like him and Lawler, like, talking, joking and stuff like that. It was definitely all an act, but it was to the point where it was almost like method acting, where he just like went in so far. He went too far with it. You know what I mean? But it was certainly an act.
Yeah, and with Kanye, I just don't know, but it's like, it's that analogy of, for me, I'm trying to figure out when I changed the channel on Kanye. 2018, and I say this again, and this is like a catchphrase, but I say this as a white guy. Like, when Kanye made those, 400 years slavery comments to TMZ, I had been changed the personal channel. And if there was a point in time, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, I probably would have told you that Kanye was my favorite current artist. Like, hung on his every musical move, thought that it was brilliant. It was watching the next superstar keep rising. But somewhere after Pablo, and it wasn't just the Trump stuff. There was a point in time where Kanye just started to become unreliable to me, and I lost interest. And there was, I was just reading a tweet, and it made me laugh. You're a basketball head. This is from Blockhead. Blockhead's a great art. I consider a great artist. Produced joints for Aesop Rock and Billy Woods and all these other people. And he tweeted, he goes, "Something lost in all this Kanye controversy is that the Life of Pablo was the last good album he made. So to see people caping for this guy still is just sort of funny. It's like going to war for Shaq on the Boston Celtics." And I don't know that I completely agree, because Kanye produced Daytona for Pusha T, which I thought was a phenomenal album, arguably the best of 2018. But Kanye doesn't capture me on the artistic level anymore. So I'm much less interested in what he's saying beyond that. It's like getting caught up in, I don't know, pick any other artist that you disagree with politically or socially that are just out there pumping it. But I guess to your point, it gets headline news everywhere when it's Ye.
Yeah, I wonder if, so for me, like, I think there's an entire generation that probably thinks of Kanye more in the fashion space than they do in the music space. And I would say that a lot of people who are later into Kanye stuff probably really like Donda too, because he has been good at continuing to ride the wave of current music. So I think that it's more Yeezys, and we know these things sell out. They go for the resale prices are 3-4 times as much as the retail costs. I think that it's because of his fashion now. But in any case, no matter how great he is at fashion, no matter how great he is at music, like I don't think that it justifies the fixation, the addiction, the fetishization of Kanye that we see. Like it's so disproportionate to anything that like I think it speaks more about us as human beings and our psyche than it does about the importance of Kanye West. He's the person, and we have this. There's a person who fits this mold every couple of years. It's just not been as long as I've seen ever on one person. So remember Britney Spears, and when
Mm-hmm.
Britney was going through her stuff, Lindsay Lohan was that person. Charlie Sheen was that person for a while. There's
Yeah.
always a person that does like outlandish stuff, and people want to follow every move as they watch their demise, literally, right? Like
Michael Jackson, arguably.
most of these people, right, ended up like either in a mental institution or rehab or dead or whatever. And Kanye has been hospitalized too, but it feels like people are watching, waiting to see his demise. Like it's just and the media plays into it, which I find to be really disturbing.
Yeah, and I mean it's one of those things where I hate seeing valuable culture go uncovered, especially in the music space. Like right now, Kanye is a political, whether you want to call him a pawn, a rook, a bishop, or a king, he's part of the chessboard. He's part of the tug of war, as he was in 2018, as I believe he was in 2020. So to see him, doing Tucker Carlson, following some fashion statements that appeal to a narrative was really disheartening. But I think those horses have been out of the barn for me. And I don't think I've ever said this publicly. One of the deciding moments in me stepping down from one of or the top hip hop news space in 2013, 2012, when I made the decision was Kanye and Kim Kardashian bought $1 million gold plated toilet for their estate. And I got into a heated discussion with some of the other leadership at that organization on whether or not that was news. And to me, that was never news. To me, that's an interesting piece of anecdotes, same as, Mike Tyson having lions, tigers, and bears, but it's not news. And I feel like for those last 10 years, everything that Kanye West has done, good, bad, otherwise, has become news. And I don't like the tradition of music coverage, whether you want to talk about all music or specifically hip hop, to buy into that to the level that they have. And it's really it's scary, especially when Kanye is leaning into really complex and dangerous things as of late. And I think that the last few weeks, especially the last 48 hours, show that quite well.
Yeah, and I think they are leading towards self-destruction. I don't see much benefit, if any, to any of the things he's doing. I see a lot of really self-destructive behavior, and I think it's sad. I think it's really, really sad.
Yeah, and my hope is I would like the next time a voice like Ambrosia to tune back in is when there's something with merit to cover. One of the interesting things, just as an illustration of what we're talking about, is the White Lives Matter shirt, and then Yassine Bey Mos Def came out with the White Lives Matter shirt in response. And the last time that we covered Kanye in a headline was from the Black Star episode on Drink Champs with Dave Chappelle. and I rolled my eyes. I wasn't happy about, covering it to the extent that you were, but we did a deep dive on Yassine actually praising Kanye at a musical level and likening him to, believe it or not, Diamond D, who we had on the show. That was the other recent interview of being kind of the resurgence of the MC producer. And at the time, I didn't see that as a new conversation, but I appreciated you in the context of the only things we read about this person can't just be unrelated to music. So it was a nice reminder. But that being said, I'm I don't want to tune other people in until there's something worth tuning in on.
Yeah, he makes it hard, and like I said, I've always tried to be balanced in the coverage, but he's so far beyond the pale at this point. It's hard to find any balance there.
Yeah.
I want to talk about something on a lighter note, though. I had a great weekend, a cultural weekend. Somewhat related to Kanye, Virgil Abloh, who folks know, an incredibly talented designer. Came to prominence under Kanye at Donda as the artistic director for Donda. Went on to launch his own off-white label, and then became the creative director for menswear for Louis Vuitton, the first Black person to have that job. Tragically died last year at age 41 from a rare form of cancer. He's got an exhibit at the Brooklyn Museum, and went and saw that yesterday. It was absolutely amazing. It showed, like, all the things he was doing in architecture and with music and with fashion and shoes, and just to see it all in one place, you just saw his genius. He was also a controversial person too. Like, he used his fashion to highlight messages, complex messages about race. There was one thing that I was really surprised by. He had done a shirt for Supreme with red, black, and green, as the colors for the Supreme logo, and he had Chief Keef modeling it. And I was thinking, man, Chief Keef, wow, this guy, you know, is one of the progenitors of the drill music scene in Chicago, which we know came with all sorts of death. His music perpetuated a lot of that violence. It made me feel a way to see him, being portrayed like that, because I realized that Kanye helped to bring him to prominence too, and you have to start to wonder how that happens. That a guy who has such a dangerous lifestyle that he brings into his music and the reality, and we'll talk about that in a bit, is heralded by one of the most commercially successful artists of all time. It's a weird connection. But that aside, like, the Virgil exhibit was amazing. Second thing is that I went to a concert last night at a place called Elsewhere in Brooklyn. I saw Roc Marciano and The Alchemist perform. They're touring to support the Elephant Man's Bones album, which is phenomenal album. And dude, when I tell you that Roc Marciano is a MC's MC, like, it could not be more true. We walk in, and the first people we see are Marco Polo, DJ Premier, Static Selector, and then we look to our right, and Snow Allegra is standing right next to us. And said what's up to her. We go backstage, and after the show, we see Large Professors there. Like, I mean, like, and I said what's up to Rock. I think I met him a long time ago at BT, but he knew Ambrosia. That gave us props. That was really dope. Got to chop it up with Alchemist a couple times, and tell him what a fan that I am, we are, as a site, and the things we've done. Hopefully, we'll talk to those guys at some point in the relatively near future. But it was a true hip hop moment, man. Seeing him on stage reminded me, he has the cool and swagger of like a Rakim. Just
Mhm.
so laid back, man, and just like, it's just so cool. It was amazing. It's one of the best rap shows I've seen in a long time.
Man, that's dope to hear. Because I know that, and I hope I'm not, but like there have been people that have been instant fans of rock, and I think for you, correct me if I'm wrong, but like that was a little bit, that was a process for you to, Similar to me with a lot of artists.
Yeah, it was an evolution, you know. I think I first started hearing rock back in 2011, 2012. I'm pretty sure that I put him in the back room
Oh
freestyle,
wow.
but I can't find it. So I'm not sure. I think I had so many artists there. But over time, man, he's become one of my favorites. You know, I really love this album. I love the album with Molly Ringwald on it. I forget what it's called. Like, came out like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
I went back and dug into his catalog. I'm a very big fan at this point, and you know, as our colleague Justin Hunt coined that term, connoisseur rap. You know, for
Yeah.
what he definitely sparked a movement. You know that I think has benefited Griselda and you know, lots of artists who've kind of followed in his footsteps. But it was super dope to see it live.
That's awesome, and I really love the Rakim comparison because I've interviewed Rock a few times. I did a press bio for him for his Merci Beaucoup album, which is very, great and slept on. And Rock is one of those guys that lets his art speak, which I appreciate. You know, there's so many people that I think their interviews sometimes are more compelling than their content. And Rock, he leaves it out in the music and has that, he's everything that he is on wax, just cool, calm, slick, very imaginative. And this album definitely is a real benchmark, not just in his catalog, but in ours. And I know we've got some joints in the playlist, which if folks haven't heard, the album is a great place to start. So
Yeah,
that's what's up.
for sure. Marcialago, that was the 2019 joint that I
Oh,
listened
right.
to. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so that was great, man. It was a great hip hop weekend, but it's been a great couple of weeks in hip hop too for new music. I know one that was been near and dear to your heart for a while dropped too. You want to talk about Open Mike Eagle?
Yeah, so it's funny, maybe perhaps like you and Rock Marcy, Open Mike is this artist that's been around for a long time, and I've listened to other people in his kind of orbit, like Serengeti and Haslo and different folks, and people would always sing Mike's praises, and again, as we talk about space time, I mean, Mike is a Chicago artist who has been living in LA for, like, I feel like a decade or more. And some of his music now sounds super LA, but there's always references to Chicago. But he had put out a single a few months back. We asked Diamond D about it, called "I'll Fight You," which is one of my favorite songs of the year. Just kind of captures some nostalgia, but some personal admissions from Mike's life. And that was the first look we got. The album is called Component System with Auto Reverse. And Mike's label is called Auto Reverse. He uses boom boxes and cassette decks as kind of an analogy and extension of himself. And the artwork, when you see it, you'll understand all of that. But I've really, really enjoyed this album. It arrived last Friday, October 7th, and it features several joints produced by Diamond D. It has Armand Hammer, which is Elucid, and Billy Woods, who I mentioned a moment ago, on it. Rap Ferreira, Video Dave, Still Rift, Aesop Rock. Diamond makes a vocal contribution on it. And it's just it was funny. I had lunch with some friends today, and we were talking about the album, and I don't know what to classify Open Mike as. I don't love the term underground for him. I don't love the term art rap for him. He's just somebody that is super duper relatable, and very much doesn't necessarily sound like Doom, but comes from that Doom count-based D school. But he has this ability to be super relatable and write about aging and write about relationships and write about anxiety in a way that I really enjoy. And this album has risen very much for me. And the joint I really liked, apart from "I'll Fight You," is the joint I sent you the other day, Crenshaw and Homeland. And you put a few on the album too, one of which is a
On the
tribute
playlist, yeah, on the
on the
playlist.
playlist, excuse
Yeah,
me, called For Doom.
yeah,
But yeah, definitely. And yeah, I know you kind of were feeling the album as well.
yeah. I really like the album, man. The first couple songs, I really like. For Doom, the Crenshaw one, the Peak Lockdown Raps is one of my favorites. I also like Circuit City. Like I think the whole album is really, really dope. And so when you were saying that, you used the term risen, and to me, what he is almost is like a if like De La Soul had gone solo.
Mm.
You know, he is that kind of dude. He'll bring creativity, humor, but also sharp insight into real everyday life. It's not about like, you know, slinging rocks and like, you know, buying whips and like stuff like that. It's about everyday person like struggles, you know, and I think it's super dope because of that.
I like that. And you and I talk a lot about vocal tone, and Mike has one of my favorite voices of artists now. And he's somebody too. I mean, he's in the same sphere as Hannibal Buress, who's become, over the last 10 years, one of my favorite stand-ups of this generation. And not for nothing, we've alluded to it on the show, but I would contend that Open Mike Eagle is one of the best podcasters, period. We've watched a lot of artists, from Nori and Talib Kweli move into that space. But his What Had Happened podcast, and that's not his only one, is phenomenal. And oddly enough, one of those seasons was dedicated to Prince Paul and another Dante Ross, two people who worked closely with De La Soul. So I like your analogy.
Yeah, and so another one also close to your heart and mine too now is Cormega's The Realness too. You know, we had him, and I urge anyone who's made it this far to go back and check out that album. If you're a Cormega fan or just a hip hop fan in general, it was one of the realest interviews we've ever had. He and his album is very much like that too. He speaks very much from what he's going through in life and very authentically. He talks about it being a true sequel, and it's an update on his life. You know, he was very intentional about matching themes and even like the ordering of the songs. And you picked up on a couple of like, you know, parallels to the album. But you can talk about this. You can do it way more justice than I. But we talked about the Nas collaboration that he has called Glorious. It's also on our playlist. The Saga Resumes, also a great song. I think the whole project is great. You know, start to finish. It's one that I've kept in heavy rotation too. But what are your thoughts about the album?
Yeah, I mean, I really, really enjoy it. It's among my favorites this year, and I think we've all, as hip hop fans, I'm sure most people can relate to me, been duped by a sequel at least one point or another, where somebody throws a name on something to get your 9.99 on iTunes or your attention, and then they don't really deliver on it. And this one was surgical. To me, I would very much, put it in the space of Raekwon's Only Built for Cuban Links too. And yeah, Corey took several songs and just completely updated them, and not in a way that is super on the nose. The Saga Resumes is arguably, but what's really cool about that is he reworked the chorus, and we talked about it in the conversation. But whereas the original Realness comes in 2001, if I'm not mistaken, it arrives just a few weeks before 9/11, and deals a lot with kind of this dope dealer MC, very much like Reasonable Doubt. And that song was an homage of like, I wish I could tell you I wasn't hustling no more, is the lyric. And now, boom, 20 plus years later, you have a father, a fully grown man, a guy who's making art beyond music, writing books, and he's telling you that he turned his life around through music. And I love that. There's just so much depth here. And it's all in the name of hip hop too, and one of the things we didn't talk about with him, there's you and him finished our interview speaking about basketball, which was really cool. But this album doesn't have a ton of references to a lot of things going on right now. It's very much evergreen. And I'm noticing that as a trend, as we talk about the value of albums and legacy, artists, and I forget who said it, but somebody once said Dr. Dre coached them on writing lyrics of don't mention things that are just for the moment. Mention things that'll stand forever. And I'm noticing a lot of great MCs doing that. And I think that's very true of The Realness too. And again, heavy rotation. We added a couple joints, including the Saga Resumes and Glorious, to the playlist. And definitely checked out that album. It's nice to see the interview continues to make its rounds on audio and video.
Yeah. So another one I listened to this week was "Kiss the Ring" by Rome Streetz, another Griselda project. Rome is another MC who's become an acquired taste for me. You know, his earlier stuff didn't speak to me in the same way, but he did a joint record. It was Rome Streetz and Ransom, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
Rome Street and Ransom, and that one, like for me, was like, wow, okay, it exposed, it opened my ear up in a completely different way. And this Griselda album, "Kiss the Ring," is a strong follow up for him. You know, it's got Gunna's on it, West Side Gun, Conway is on it,
Stove God.
Armani Caesar's on it. Stove God is dope. He's another one. Like, you know, when that first album, when the album came out a couple years ago that everyone loved, it hadn't resonated with me yet, but everything he's released since then has just been like super dope. He's one of my favorite new MCs. Um, Another great addition to Griselda, man. Did you get a chance to check that one out yet?
Yeah, listen when it dropped, and I really like the way it opens. And I really, have been a fan of Rome. Shout out to Jordan Commandier, who, one of our writers through the 2018, 19, 20 days of Ambrosia for Heads, and he made me a fan of Rome. And to watch his trajectory, and really set himself apart. And he's the type of artist too that hasn't been overexposed. So to hear his story, I believe he was born in Germany and immigrated to Brooklyn, but has a really interesting life. And when you learn more about him, you appreciate the fact that he's many things. He's not just a hustler, not just like, a New York, rapidy rap cat. And this album and this association with Griselda, I hope opens a lot of folks up to him. I've been a fan of him. He has a joint, it's one of his biggest, called Nautica 96 Windbreaker, I think. I might have muffled the title, but that ever since then, man, he's just been one to watch for me.
Yeah, for sure. YG dropped an album. I Got Issues. I've never been the biggest YG fan, but I listened to the whole thing and found myself enjoying more than I thought I would. You know, like three or four joints really spoke to me. Did you check that one out?
Yeah, absolutely. I did. And I will say, I mentioned it earlier in the pod, but like My Crazy Life, I really, I thought that was one of, I would say I like that album more than anything that Jeezy's put out on his own label. And that was because I was back in CTE. YG is an important part of that West Coast story. So I have been a fan. And the new one sounded like he's back in fighting condition again, which is great. Been checking that. I checked Young RJ from the latest iteration of Slum Village. He has an album called World Tour. Pete Rock's on it. Pino Palladino. I believe Boldy James. Just Eric Roberson. There's been a host of people. Yeah, Boldy is definitely on it. That, and then Sonny Jim, who's a London-based rapper, working with DJ Premier and Madlib, and him and the Purists teamed up for an album called White Girl Wasted. We've got a joint on our playlist that has Jay Electronica and Doom from that. I've really enjoyed that and just been trying to open myself up to just more global hip hop in general. But there's one other project I just want to mention in brief because it's been out a long time. But as we march towards the end of the year, it's something that I would encourage anyone who believes in our platform to check out. And that's JID or JID's The Forever Story. Truly one of the best albums this year. And I will go on record in saying it is the best album that he's put out thus far.
Oh yeah, I completely co-sign that. It's top two for me. That and Mr. Morale are my two favorites so far this year. You know, two other albums that I was excited about over the last couple weeks. One is Soul Sold Separately, which is Freddie Gibbs' new album. I think it's Freddie's best work in many years. He's got a couple joints on the playlist. One is called CIA. It's called Crack, Instagram, and what's the A for?
It's not Adderall. Attention.
No, Crack, Instagram, and it's a cool anagram for what he thinks the CIA and AIDS has introduced to decimate communities, but it's tongue in cheek, but also very clever and sharp in commentary. And there's also a song called Rabbit Vision, where Freddie shows a lot of growth. You know, he acknowledges recently that he and Jeezy saw each other in the airport, dapped each other up, and had a great exchange and really kind of ended their beef. And on the song, he acknowledges that a lot of their problems stem from his own immaturity and that he really appreciates the game that Jeezy gave him and teaching him about, you know, the music business and how to become a rapper and so forth. And so great to see his growth on that. The other one was, and I've never been a huge Kid Cudi fan, but Intergalactic, his soundtrack to the Netflix animated film, I think is some of his best work in a long, long time too. You know, it's very cohesive. It's more accessible than a lot of Cudi's music has been in quite some time. But I thought both those projects were really strong too.
I need to check the Cudi album at length. You sent me a song or two, and I checked that, and I thought that it was better than even what I'd heard over the last 3-4 years. So I will do that this week for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So yo, anything else you got?
Nah, man, I think that really covers it. Like I said at the top, man, I missed this.
Yeah, for sure, man. Me too. Great week in hip hop. Always great to chop it up with you about it. And song of the day. I mean, song of the week. You got a song of the week?
Yeah, I mean, we talked. I could have picked from any number of those albums we spoke about. I'll give it to a project that I didn't mention. Soul Messiah, part of the Rhyme Sayers crew, has been Roc's longtime, not just DJ but producer, and he put out a compilation album with a number of people on it. It's called God Complex. Evidence is on it. You know, Roc, of course. Just a host of people, and he's got a joint there with Planet Asia called Sunday School. And since today is Sunday, and you know, this feels like education, I'll go with that joint. What about
Word.
you?
For me, I'm gonna go back to last night, man. I enjoyed that concert so much. I'm gonna go to Quantum Leap from Alchemist and Roc Marciano, the Elephant Man's Bones. That joint goes hard. So love that one.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice. Yeah, I need to revisit that album, man. Well, hopefully we will get Al, if not Al and Rock, on the show. I look forward to it, and yeah, man, I hope to see them on the road for this album, man. But
Yeah,
so
for
we do it
sure.
again.
Word, man. Peace.
Likewise, man. Peace.